As a personal injury lawyer, handling an auto accident case involving a tractor trailer or other commercial vehicle is much different from handling a car accident case involving two ordinary passenger vehicles. There's a few reasons why this is, the first being that the injuries in truck accidents tend to be more serious. Commercial vehicles are much heavier than passenger vehicles by definition, and the heavier the vehicle, traveling at the same speed is going to result in a more forceful collision. So a tractor trailer going 45 miles an hour rear-ending somebody on the highway is more likely to result in serious injuries than if a car rear-ended that person going the same speed. And because these truck accidents are more likely to cause serious injuries or even death, the dollar figures associated with settlements and verdicts in these cases tend to be larger overall. Given how dangerous these big trucks can be in the wrong hands, it should come as no surprise that the federal government has heavily regulated the trucking industry. Of course, truck drivers are required to have a commercial driver's license, or CDL, and entry-level drivers are now required to complete formal training through federally approved training providers before they can obtain a CDL. This is actually a relatively new requirement put in place by the federal government in an effort to make highways safer. And while trucking companies are not required to train the drivers themselves, they are required to hire competent and safe drivers, or they can face liability for negligent hiring. The federal regulations can be found at the FMCSR, which stands for the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. These govern interstate motor carriers as opposed to intrastate motor carriers. So that means the tractor trailers that are traveling across multiple states carrying property for hire is an interstate motor carrier that's subject to these federal regulations. Although in terms of intrastate carriers, that is the vehicles that are only transporting goods inside a given state, those are not subject to the federal regulations. However, most states have adopted these at the state level as well. What you may not know, though, is it's not just tractor trailers that are subject to these federal regulations. It is all commercial vehicles in interstate commerce. And a commercial vehicle is defined as having a gross vehicle weight of over 10,000 pounds. So with limited exceptions, any vehicle that's traveling in interstate commerce that weighs more than 10,000 pounds is going to be subject to these regulations. And that could potentially reach a number of non-tractor trailer type vehicles, such as landscaping trucks or large pickup trucks with trailers, utility trucks or work vans. All of these could potentially be subject to these federal regulations, whether the owner or operator even realizes it. And those owners or operators can face liability if they don't comply with these regulations. There are a lot of regulations that are comprehensive in all aspects of commercial vehicle operations. So I won't attempt to go through them all here, but I will talk about a few that we tend to see a lot or focus on. Those would include the hours of service violations. So if the driver is driving for too long without sleep, there are limits to that to try to address driver fatigue and keep folks safe on the roads. Another is medical conditions that the driver may have. There's a physical required upon hiring, and the driver obviously has to be medically fit in order to drive for safety reasons as well. You also want to look at the regulations governing conspicuity, which it refers to that reflective tape that is on the sides and rear of trailers. That's required by law to make those vehicles easier to see, particularly at night, and reflect headlights. If those markings are missing or in poor condition to where they diminish the visibility of the trailer, you can have a violation of those regulations as well. Other regulations govern the mechanical issues, such as maintenance and inspection requirements, and there's also record-keeping requirements for all of these areas. Trucking companies are required to keep records of all these for compliance. Another big area of federal regulation is insurance. So depending on the type of vehicle and the type of cargo carrier, et cetera, there are minimum levels that trucking companies are required to have in liability insurance or self-insurance if that is the case, and they are required to file a certificate with the federal government to prove that they have met that minimum liability insurance requirement. That can vary from $750,000 to $5 million, again, depending on the case. Most larger truck companies will carry multiple policies of insurance beyond the minimum required, but they don't always want to disclose it all, even when they're required to do so by law. We've actually caught insurers or companies hiding insurance that we then use to secure compensation for our clients. So it's, again, important not only to have an attorney who knows the regulations, but also is willing to fight for you to make sure that you get the full compensation that you deserve. A few more things I want to touch on, differences in these cases. One is that the responsible parties or potentially responsible parties are greater in truck cases. So in ordinary car accident, there's one person who's clearly at fault and is going to be liable for the damages. And in truck wrecks, there's usually potentially more parties beyond just the driver and then the truck company that employed the driver. There could also be brokers or dealers, shippers, cargo loaders, maintenance companies, trailer suppliers, etc. Even the employment relationship between the driver and the truck company is important to look at as well, because a truck company or any company is vicariously liable for their employees' negligence within the course and scope of that person's employment. So that means that the company is liable for the driver's accident even if the company itself didn't do anything wrong, right? It's derivative of the driver's negligence, but only if that person's an employee. And oftentimes drivers are treated as independent contractors. Sometimes in reality they're still an employee, but that's a very important area to look at in these cases. And last but not least, these cases, truck cases that is, tend to be more complex in general. They tend to involve more expert witnesses, and your opponents tend to be more well-funded and willing to spend money to litigate or fight the case. So in terms of experts, you generally have at least two experts in any trucking case. You have an accident reconstruction expert and an industry standards expert, as I'll call it. So you need an expert witness not only to tell a jury what happened, which is similar to car accident cases in that regard, but in trucking cases, you also need an expert to explain these federal regulations and any violations of those regulations to a jury. And these are typically folks who have worked in the trucking industry, usually in various roles, including driver and safety director, et cetera. Some have even run their own trucking companies. And there's a number of experts who are very good at this, and they are very good at explaining to juries about what is expected in the trucking industry as a minimum standard, not only what's required by the federal regulations, but what is, again, standard practice in the industry. And that is important because the jury needs to be able to understand what violations took place or what the standard of care, if you will, was and how it was violated in any given case. Sometimes you'll also need a human factors expert to discuss things like conspicuity. That can also be the case in car accident cases, but again, it's all the more important in truck cases because you have well-funded opponents and there's a lot more at stake generally for the trucking companies themselves who stand to lose a lot more beyond just whatever insurance there may be. So for all these reasons and more, it is especially important in trucking cases to hire a skilled and knowledgeable attorney who has the resources to fight for the compensation that you deserve.